Ballarat. We're members of the Tourism and Protected Areas Specialist Group, which is one of the specialist groups within the WCPA, and we're actually the only specialist group within the whole of IUCN that officially deals with tourism. So we sort of, yes, it's about protected areas because we're in WCPA, but our interests are not just confined to protected areas. However, what this session today is, I'm just going to give you a very quick sort of run through what the specialist group does, because some of you might be interested to become members and join us following this Congress. And then Jim is going to take you through a case study of public-private partnerships, which increasingly are important components of the ways in which tourism and protected areas, or tourism and conservation works these days. 10 years ago, you know, there was less of the partnership component. Now it's becoming increasingly important. So Jim's going to talk to you about work that he's been doing and lessons from that. And then Yufa is going to take you through what is one of the key tasks for our task force at the moment, and that is to prepare a new edition of the best-selling, I have to say, a very popular best practice guidelines, the IUCN's best practice guidelines on tourism and protected areas. So this session, if you've come here wanting to learn, well, you maybe learn a little bit. Hopefully you'll come here willing to share your knowledge and your experience, because what we'd like to do is have short presentations followed by a very interactive session in which we get input from you in terms of what you think the new guidelines should include, what issues are important, what issues have been overlooked, or what issues are emerging that we don't seem to have thought about. So that's sort of a snapshot of what this session's about. Just to give you a little bit more background on what the TAPIS group's about, we're essentially looking obviously at the issues around tourism and conservation of protected areas, and trying to ensure that the relationship is a positive one and not one in which tourism is seen to be a problem, which sometimes in the past it has been. So we're a group that collectively we have membership from around many countries, and I'll talk about that in a moment, but we have people who are academics like ourselves, people who represent NGOs, consultants, government agencies, and collectively we try to draw on our expertise to provide advice to either people within IUCN and WCPA or other organisations or within the tourism industry. We're very interested and involved in capacity building and effectiveness of management, and about, importantly, knowledge dissemination, which is part of what this project with reviewing the best practice guidelines focuses on. So the structure is within the IUCN. You're probably all aware of the different commissions. Our specialist group fits within the WCPA, and within our group we've organised ourselves with an executive group that has fairly regular contact with one another, a membership which is made up of full members, anyone who's a member of the WCPA, or others as associates who are not WCPA members but interested to be involved. And we have a number of working groups, and we are attempting to get people to align themselves to particular working groups so that the productivity of the specialist group will continue to increase. And of course 2014 is going to be the next World Parks Congress, and so we sort of seeing this as an opportunity to try and energise and increase the outputs and the productivity of our group. So we'll be happy to hear from any of you that are interested to become active members. Currently, this is our membership base, 69 countries and some 230 members. As I said, made up from people representing a range of sectors. I'm not sure why so many are academics, but it's just perhaps the nature of the sort of work that we do. But we would certainly like to see more from any of those, but in particular more young people, because I think this is a challenge for IUCN generally, and WCPA, is to increase the younger membership so that we have someone to pass the baton to in a few years. Just if you're interested in particular areas of the steering group, of the specialist group, and who's doing what, these are the people that are currently our key points of contact for the different working groups. And our action plan at the moment is, one, to build up our membership, which is why I'm doing a bit of a spiel. We're certainly trying to increase our networking and our partnerships, and we're certainly looking to engage more with the private sector, and to do more in terms of the development and the dissemination of knowledge. And the second dot point there, the best practice guidelines, is what this session is focusing on, but is not the only aspect of our work. We're certainly looking at a range of publications and different types of material to assist people in either working inside protected areas or within tourism that are interested in partnerships with protected areas. And some of you may have been to the session this morning that Jim and his colleagues ran on capacity building. It's an important area of work for the IUCN, and because tourism is increasingly an area of major activity, visitor management, this is an area that we're looking to increase our activity. Now, UFI's got a little bookmark that he might pass around. If any of you have an interest in becoming actively involved, then we would like to hear from you. While UFI's doing that, I'm now going to hand it over to Jim, who is going to give you a presentation about the partnerships, because, as I say, that's an area that is particularly important in relation to tourism in protected areas. So thanks, Jim.
Thank you very much, Robin. 4 years ago, at the last World Conservation Congress in Barcelona, I had the opportunity to report on the beginning of an initiative involving a number of partners, at the time led by Conservation International, but soon to include this working group, Tourism in Protected Areas, of the World Commission on Protected Areas, the United States National Park Service, Colorado State University, and a number of other partners, to look more closely at an issue that's come up repeatedly here as part of our deliberations on Jeju Island, on the need for public-private partnerships for improved management of protected areas, and particularly for management of tourism. I'd just like to briefly show a picture of a park that illustrates the challenges we face. Now, there are a few situations in the world where there are individual facilities and trails and protected areas that have too many visitors. But I think that all would agree that in most countries and most protected areas, we do not have the requisite public and decision-maker support to achieve conservation. And here's a good example of one of the problems we face. A state park in the largest metropolitan area in South America, in the heart of Sao Paulo, a city whose metro population is on the order of 20 million people, where you can see the entire city. It looks almost like it would be Central Park in New York, for example, with only a few tens of thousands of paying visitors a year. Obviously, the opportunity for environmental education, the health benefits of protected areas, the opportunity to engage the public of a large metropolitan area in conservation is not being met when we do not have adequate facilities to both get more public support, to improve the health of urban populations. And one of the biggest issues is that government agencies and NGOs and communities oftentimes lack the requisite acumen and abilities to be able to move forward on tourism in protected areas. So the first point that's been mentioned over and over here in other sessions is that success in conservation requires public and political support, and people support what they know and love. If our areas are off limits to public visitation, and if we do not create facilities and programs that are educational, that are helpful, and that are inspirational, we're going to lose many battles. The other thing is that governments, NGOs, and communities, even if they're interested in tourism, often lack the necessary business acumen and entrepreneurial skills and capital to be able to improve programs and facilities for tourism in protected areas. But at the same time, these same communities and the business sector and governments are in many places saying we need to embrace more tourism in parks. Parks need to generate more revenue. We need to deal with health issues, and we need to promote environmental education. So there's pressure from a number of sectors to increase the amount of tourism in protected areas. However, most protected areas, particularly in developing countries, are a long way from saying that they are adequately meeting their management objectives of almost all of IUCN's protected area management categories, which allow at least some tourism. So there is none or incipient tourism in these areas. At the same time, the role of ecotourism, the number of tourists, both national and international tourists, going to protect areas is increasing in many regions. So that's a bit of the background. So institutional options for protected area management are a key issue here at Jeju. We've talked a lot about different governance options for protected areas. The traditional protected areas managed by government agencies and intergovernmental authorities, those managed or owned by NGOs, managed by indigenous tribes, by communities, by private businesses and companies. There's a huge movement in many countries around the world to create private reserve networks. And also protected areas owned and managed by universities and research centers. We have our own, basically, protected area run by our university called Pingree Park Campus. And the global tendency is not toward one or another of these, but toward co-management agreements embracing governments, NGOs, universities, communities, and the private sector. And another thing that's important is who owns the land, who runs the protected area, who provides services within the protected area, are different concepts, as is management categories. So it's very possible to have an area that is created by government, owned by government, but where there are a number of for-profit and non-profit partners involved in day-to-day management of tourism. So we have learned that partnerships are key to protected area success, and particularly in the area of tourism management. And as more protected areas are created, more complex protected areas, we're seeing that there is increasing use of a range of institutional options for delivering tourism within them. And these include special use permits, contracts both short and long term, which may be exclusive and non-exclusive, concession agreements, which in some cases go up to 60 years in length for management of marinas or management of hotels within protected areas, and increasing the use of co-management agreements, partnering communities, NGOs, for-profit service providers such as tour companies and governments. We know that many times well-meaning communities and NGOs and government agencies would like to see more tourism in protected areas, but they lack the investment capital to actually be able to invest in facilities. And so partnerships with for-profit partners can often help us leverage investments which would otherwise not be available for improving trails, overlooks, visitor centers, and visitor programs in protected areas. And at the same time, if we show success for these partnerships, we can leverage additional support from governments in improving roads, in increasing staff levels, and also in improving livelihoods for local communities. And one of the key concepts here, and many times people who are opposed to the concept of increased private business involvement in parks say that we're privatizing protected areas. You hear this like knee-jerk reaction. They're privatizing our park. Well, that's not the case. In most protected areas where there are tourism around the world, they are already heavily privatized, but there's not a flow of benefits because there are a series of free riders, in economist terms, who are not giving back to the protected areas they're benefiting from. So the concept is not to privatize protected areas, but rather how can we leverage additional finance and privatize the cost of investment, but socialize the benefits of having improved programs and facilities in protected areas. The benefits of public-private partnerships have been long recognized. I'm from the United States, and there were partnerships with hoteliers and railroads to build infrastructure in parks a century ago. So the concept of partnering with private enterprise to improve parks is something that's been done in a number of countries around the world. And partnerships, including tourism partnerships, has been a theme of IUCN and the Commission on Protected Areas and this working group for a long time, dating at least back to the 1992 World Parks Congress in Venezuela, where there was a whole series of presentations regarding the need for increased partnerships for tourism and protected area management. At the last World Parks Congress, there was a lot more attention given to this, and a whole series of presentations argued that we need to do more research on this topic. A number of major donors just in the last 4 years have gotten on the bandwagon, so to speak. The IFC, the private funding arm of the World Bank, is supporting projects. For example, I see a representative of one of those projects in the audience in places like Indonesia and Mozambique for private sector investments in tourism concessions in protected areas. The Inter-American Development Bank, active in the entire Western Hemisphere, is funding a whole series of investments in state parks, for example in Sao Paulo in Brazil, including at that park I showed. The World Bank, the Global Environmental Facility, the UN system, USAID, and other bilateral partners. There's a lot of enthusiasm for looking for productive ways to promote more of these types of partnerships. And the Convention on Biological Diversity, having as one of its main goals the equitable distribution of cost and benefits, obviously is very interesting in seeing how to empower communities and make sure that communities are part of the equation in providing tourism services, and looking for ways to combine the business acumen of corporations and private investors with communities on the ground in something that is more than just an effort to create menial jobs, but rather to empower the communities to be full partners and stockholders in businesses in and around protected areas. As just one example, with one of the largest conservation foundations in Brazil, the SEMEA Institute, it is partnering with the Convention on Biological Diversity to host a workshop on this topic with support from our working group at the next COP of the Convention on Biological Diversity in India in just a few weeks. Now, very obviously, tourism in protected areas is growing in many parts of the world, both developed and developing, and at the same time, decision makers are asking parks and protected areas to pay their own way more. They're being asked to generate more revenue, and one of the key ways they can generate revenue is through valuing environmental services, and provision of tourism and recreation is one of those environmental services that can create that benefit stream. So parks are being asked to pay their own cost of operation more by having more visitors, by charging those visitors both for entry and for the use of programs and facilities, and so this creates some major challenges to protected area managers. But one of the key ones is that there have been many investments in community-based ecotourism around the world by donors and by conservation groups over the past several decades. Many of these have actually failed, and we have to be honest about that. We've entered with good intentions. We've provided everything from kayaks to help communities build hotels, to train them as rangers, only to see many of these efforts fall flat on their face because it wasn't infrastructure that people needed. It was an intergenerational change as they became small business people and as they understood the different needs to have a service-based industry and to basically create enough goodwill and enough positive recommendations by word of mouth to create a regular stream of tourists. So there have been a lot of raised expectations and underwhelming results with many of the investments to date of working only with communities without bringing in the private sector as partners as well. And at the same time, local actors, often though they have a series of skills and trades that could contribute to the success of tourism, they do not have either the capital or the expertise in dealing with marketing, in dealing with a service-based industry, in dealing with hygiene. They don't have the language skills. So expecting overnight success by working only between government agencies and communities has led to a number of underwhelming results over the past couple of decades. So the question becomes, how can we how can we leverage the abilities of communities and the fact that they have livelihood needs? How can we combine that with the business acumen and the skills, the marketing skills, and the capital that the private sector could bring to bear on some of these issues? And so there are a lot of efforts right now to try to deal with that. Obviously, another thing is that, and getting back to this issue of privatization, there is no substitute for strong government institutions. If the government does not directly provide the tourism services, this does not mean that the government should not be supervising quality and ensuring that there is this flow of benefits to communities and that the concessionaires are adequately giving back resources to the protected areas where they are operating. But at the same time, the government should help promote these innovative partnerships involving government agencies, communities, and the private sector. Another problem we have to deal with is there is widespread distrust among these actors traditionally. I work primarily in Latin America, and many people in the business community call those of us that are conservationists watermelons. Does everyone know why that is? Why, it's because we're green on the outside and red in the middle, of course. As many of them see us as unrepentant leftists and with a negative attitude toward the business sector. And so breaking down this mold and this distrust between NGOs, the business sector, and communities